Hello everybody and welcome to another video of IL-2 Battle of Stalingrad with Bismarck. Now some time ago I said that once the game is fully released I will have a look at it in detail, explain exactly what I think is good with it in its present state on release, and see what I think is not so good, whether I still enjoy it or not at this point. I have a lot of questions from quite a few people, and most of those go along the line of, is it worth buying? Many people have gotten an interest into flight simulators from War Thunder, and for that I am very happy, in fact, because that is probably one of the most positive things that War Thunder has done for the flight sim genre, and that is create an interest from people that didn't really have an interest before. And they've worked their way through arcade to realistic battle and then sim battle and are now looking for a wider challenge. So the question from all of these people is it worth buying into IL-2 Battle of Stalingrad, seeing that it's one of the newest, if not the newest flight sim out there? Honestly, I cannot tell you whether it's worth buying or not, because that is always something that comes with the purchase itself, and that is a subjective opinion. However, I will tell you a little bit about what I think is good with IL-2 Battle of Stalingrad and some of the things that annoy me a little bit about the game. And I think that you should treat this video not so much as go out there and buy it or go out there and don't buy it, but more as part of your research on the title, and then maybe it's part of your final decision whether you want to buy it or not. Now, before we start going fully into the matter, I want to address two things. First of all, with this video I am focusing on the people that are new to flight sims. If you are somebody that already has some experience in flight sims from the past few years, or even if you're one of the old guard, certainly, listen to my opinion, maybe give me your ideas about IL-2 Battle of Stalingrad. But it's mainly focused on the people that are new to it and that don't really have the experience in the genre just yet. The second thing also is that I want to address a very specific thing, and that is this game being part of the IL-2 franchise. Now, the IL-2 franchise is probably the most known franchise out there when it comes to flight sims. The old IL-2 was, of course, developed by MacLeod, and it has, for better or worse, become a classic of the flight genre, and it's probably also been one of the titles that really catapulted the genre forward in terms of immersion. Now, I see when you look at the debates in the forums and on the Steam discussion post, a lot of people that look at the IL-2 franchise and that think that due to the name IL-2 Battle of Stalingrad, that IL-2 Battle of Stalingrad is part of that franchise. And in many ways it is. It is a clear line from IL-2 Sturmovik over to IL-2 Cliffs of Dover to IL-2 Battle of Stalingrad. However, there were a few certain changes along the way. First of all, IL-2 Battle of Stalingrad is not developed by the same team that did the two games before. MacLeod, for example, is no longer part of the development team. If you're somebody that believes, and I know there are some people out there, that MacLeod is basically the messiah of the flight sim genre, and that IL-2 Sturmovik and IL-2 1946, for example, were the pinnacle of flight sims, then you will probably not find anything worthwhile with IL-2 Battle of Stalingrad, simply because you've built yourself up in that myth. Now, likewise, for those people that were very critical of IL-2, the old IL-2s and IL-2 Cliffs of Dover, you also have to have a look at this title with fresh eyes, simply because the team that made the old IL-2 and IL-2 Cliffs of Dover, and in many ways completely messed up Cliffs of Dover, because it was horrendous on launch. It was probably one of the worst game launches out there, and it only has been saved by a very dedicated and very skillful mod crew. It's not the same one as that has produced IL-2 Battle of Stalingrad. However, there are certain elements from that old team that I believe are part of the designing and the development progress of IL-2 Battle of Stalingrad. That being said, however, I believe that this new team has developed something that cannot be compared to the debacle that was Cliffs of Dover back when it launched. So my recommendation for all those people that have some kind of pre-built conception about IL-2 and the franchise, they should have a fresh look at this title. Doesn't mean that you should forget what happened in the past, because there were some very, very horrible things that happened back then. And for example, the old IL-2 forums, they were one of the most poisonous places on the internet back then, simply because there was this constant war between people that pointed out the flaws of the old IL-2 against those people that blindly followed what the developers were doing. Now, with all that being said, let's really go into the game, and let me explain to you what I think is the good stuff about IL-2 Battle of Stalingrad and what is the not so good stuff. And I think we're going to start with the latter, simply so I can get it out there. And I will probably talk a little bit more about this, but that doesn't mean that it really takes away from the whole experience, as I will say in the end. Now, all in all, there are 3 things that annoy me with IL-2 Battle of Stalingrad, and I think are things that the developers should have a look at and improve in potential subsequent titles or plain packets or whatever they have planned at the moment. First of all is the progression system. IL-2 Battle of Stalingrad has a progression system, and the way that you play the single player campaign in order to gain experience on your various aircrafts and then unlock certain modifications and skins. Now, this is something that the flight sim genre hasn't really seen just yet, or it is something especially controversial in the flight sim genre, because until now the status quo, and I'm not including War Thunder in the genre here, but until now the status quo has always been you get the planes and you get them out of the box, and if there's any kind of modification that you can make those planes, they are automatically given to you. You set up the plane as you want it from day one and you go out and fly. Now, this unlock system has changed this, and I think it merits a little bit of discussion, because while there are certain positive aspects to it, I think they're overshadowed by the overall implication that this has on the game. First of all, let's talk a little bit about where this idea maybe came from, and I think we can narrow it down to 2 possibilities. First of all is that the developers want to get people to try the single player campaign for whatever reason, and maybe use it as a sort of enforced tutorial. They want people to have a look at the planes, they want people to start flying with the planes and learn these planes a little bit before they go on multiplayer, and they reward people doing that by giving them certain kinds of modifications. However, the problem with that is that for a lot of players that already know how to fly and that know how to behave in multiplayer, they have absolutely no interest in single player, but they're sitting there with planes that simply need unlocks to be set up in the way that the player wants to do it. For example, let's say that you are a fighter pilot, but you are also very interested in doing fighter bomber missions. You just tell yourself and your friends, let's go on this multiplayer server and we're going to fly our Bf-109s and we're going to bomb a certain tank column or a train. Now, unless you have the bombs unlocked, you cannot do that. And that is certainly something that is a bummer for a lot of people that know how to fly and that have flown for a long time, because they are restricted in what they can do. Likewise, I think that this enforced tutorial idea, or this idea of using single player to get better at the game and having yourself rewarded by playing the single player campaign instead of going to the multiplayer, breeds the problems that people will try to grind their way through single player without enjoying it, and that means they will always try to get kills very quickly, they will fly recklessly, and they will also try to play the system. And I will have a clip here in the background where you see me doing the exact same thing as I just explained. I want to have certain unlocks on my Bf-109 just to have the full plane fully unlocked, and I have to play single player. Now, I have found out certain ways of doing this. For example, I'm simply shadowing a small flight of bombers. I'm waiting until they land, then I attack, and I don't really care too much about flying and so on. I just want to get those kills, and in the end I'm rewarded with it and I get my unlocks that I want. And I think this is something that doesn't really fit with the idea of trying to reward players for progression by helping them give an incentive for learning the game. Because this is not, I think, the incentive. The incentive should be of getting better at the game and beating your opponents online, instead of making this artificial incentive of saying you have to get certain unlocks, and for that you need to get kills, and so on. So it takes away from what I would think is the important aspect, and that is to learn how to fly and beat your opponents, to a more kill-focused gameplay that rewards people, maybe even for reckless flying, and just, going out there, shooting as much as possible into enemy planes, not really caring what happens to you, and hoping that it yields some kind of reward. Yeah, it's this fast grinding that I believe could be quite bad for quite a few pilots that come in there. Now, the second possibility why this progression system is in place is because of the early access program. Now, depending on what stage you brought yourself into the early access program, I believe you had certain kind of tiers. I believe those that brought themselves in quite early have all the modifications already. I might be mistaken here, and have all the plane available. I certainly have all the planes available, but I don't have all the modifications. So I think that this was certainly a way of maybe incentivizing the purchase of the product by saying, look, on launch you will have everything already, you can fly all the planes. But at the same time, I think this takes away from what makes flight sims, and that is that you have a wide selection of aircraft, and that you fly what you want to fly, and you beat the opponent with the given setup that you want from the start. So I'm hoping that maybe in the future this early access promise or program gets modified in such a way as that it doesn't incorporate these unlocks that a lot of the more mature audience of flight sims doesn't really appreciate all that much. It is certainly something that is quite new, and that has come with the new kind of wave of early access programs. And in general, I would say I would really want to see everything out of the box given to the player. And if there was some kind of unlock, then it should be for skins only. I can definitely see how pilots would want to maybe accept the notion that you can unlock skins while progressing with the game. But because skins, they're cosmetic, yeah. Certainly, me, for example, the BF 109 F4, I want to have the Finnish skin and the Orca skin, and I'm prepared to grind my way through them. But at the same time, I would say it would be a lot better if that was something that gets given to me along the way, and not part of this enforced kind of progression system that is part of both skins and modifications. If it was just skins, and it would be given to me as I fly, as I progress, as I get experience, as I succeed, then I wouldn't have so much of a problem with it. I can see how other players will disagree with this, but when it comes to some kind of progression system, I would like to see it limited to skins only. Now, we're moving on to the second point that I am critical of in IL-2 Battle of Stalingrad, and that is the graphical options. Quite honestly, I am very disappointed. It's a title that comes out in 2014, and the graphical options are restricted to 4 presets and a little bit of anti-aliasing and VSync. Yeah, that is something that should not be the case, and I don't think the developers have given adequate reasoning for this, although they have certainly tried to explain it, which I am thankful for, because there are developers out there that do make choices that they don't explain. So I'm thankful that they have responded to the questions. But at the same time, a title 2014, whatever reason you give, you'd be hard pressed to find one that is acceptable. And I really hope that at some point down the line it will be changed, that they change their stance on this. I don't know why this is, like, as I said, I've read through what they have told us, and I'm thankful that they have responded to the community. But even though they have, as far as I know, said it's not going to happen, we're not going to allow custom graphics or custom graphical options, I hope that at some point they will change on this stance, because it is certainly something that would help people with older machines, and I think it's simply something that should be in a PC game. If it's a flight sim that really focuses on the gameplay, or if it's a shooter, it doesn't really matter. It's a PC game. Give us custom graphical options, and I think it would go a long way of also showing that you listen to your community, in the sense that you make a turnaround based on community feedback. Of course, listening to the community is a double-edged sword. You shouldn't do it too much, but there are really common sense things that I think apply throughout the gaming genre, and customizable graphical options is one of them. Now, the third and last thing I want to criticize is the control setup. Now, this is something that really comes only into play if you're playing with a low-end joystick and are maybe not used so much to real flight simulators. Now, all the flight simulators that I've played until now, I've never really run into this problem. The problem is, however, that back when I was flying flight sims, I had a joystick that was way better than what I have now. Right now, I'm flying with a Logitech 3D Pro. I think that's what, Extreme Pro. I think that's what it's called. And I had heard of a lot of people that fly with the stick that they have the same problem. That is that the controls are very jerky. You make a slightest input on your stick and the plane just flies off into some kind of direction following the control input. And you have to be very careful what you do. Now, this comes from, I think the professional term for this is the one-to-one control implementation. And if you think about it a little bit, imagine a control stick in a real plane. It's quite long. So if you would pull on it, let's say a distance of 1 centimeter, the deflection on your elevator, for example, will be quite significantly less than on a small stick that is maybe only 1/4 of the length. So I believe this one-to-one implementation has caused some problems on the low-end sticks that have no kind of optimization or compensation for this control scheme that causes this kind of jerkiness. Of course, you have control curves in the program that you can have that help you alleviate this program a little bit, and of course you will also get used to it with time. In fact, I found the challenge of getting used to these controls in some way a little bit annoying, but in the same kind of way also rewarding, because at some point you will see yourself getting used to them. And I think that is also really a way of rewarding myself by saying, look, back when I got this game, I couldn't control the planes properly. Or, well, when I did, I had really big troubles. But right now, I'm flying really smoothly. So that is something that is certainly rewarding to me. But at the same time, I'm just thinking, comparing it with other flight sims, like DCS, for example, or Rise of Flight, or Cliffs of Dover, I don't have that problem with the same stick. And coming in as a new player into the flight sim genre, and being faced with these jerky flight models with your low-end stick, because when you go into flight sims, you will probably be flying with a low-end stick, like the one I have, then you will probably be facing more problems than you should have. Then again, it is something that you will get used to, and it is an initial annoyance, and once you're used to it, I think it really feels like you are controlling an aircraft, because let's be honest, jerking on your stick like crazy, that's not flying. Yeah, that is, I don't know what that is, but it's not flying. Yeah, flying is very smooth controls, very smooth inputs, and just making these minute adjustments that really get you the kill. At least that's what I feel like. Flying should never be something crazy where you yank your stick up and down, left and right, and twist it all the way. It should be something that is very calculated, very smooth, and extremely, extremely precise. Now, with all of that being said, let me get to the positive aspects, and I can round the positive aspects into basically saying everything else that I have not yet talked about. Flying IL-2 Battle of Stalingrad, I really, really enjoy it. For example, even though in many ways the single player is flawed, I'm enjoying it. I'm flying it, and I like it. It's not as rewarding as multiplayer, but if I want a quiet minute to myself, then I will just jump into an aircraft and fly off. Of course, there's also the added incentive of me trying to get certain skins, so maybe somewhere down the line this will no longer be the case, but right now I am enjoying it. Likewise, I'm enjoying flying on the multiplayer, and I think some of the servers that are out there One of them being, for example, the heavy metal server on the EU side. It has a cap of 130 players, and they're trying to break the 100 player mark. I think that is just amazing. And it certainly goes back to the old days when you had big servers, big player numbers, and it's like flying Cliffs of Dover at prime time, which is just an amazing experience. You have fights, you get to those fights, you dogfight it out with the enemy, you get kills, they get kills. It's simply rewarding, and the feeling of accomplishment when you do get a kill, and the feeling of simply having achieved something against an enemy pilot is, I think, still something that is second to none, and that is something that is very unique to these flight sim games, and IL-2 Battle of Stalingrad does capture that perfectly as well. I'm also very pleased with how they have implemented the various aircraft. We have, I believe, a very balanced setup between the nations. Of course, you can make the argument that the Russian side has slightly weaker aircraft, but at the same time, the pilots that fly there, they are fighting hard and they also achieve success. So, even though on paper the German side, for example, with the Bf-109F4s, G2s and 190A3s is stronger than the Russian side with the LAG-3, with the Yak-1 and the LA-5. In reality, it really comes down to the skill of the pilot and not so much what you're flying. And certainly, you can get kills if you know what you're doing in weaker aircraft, and I think some of the pilots even specialize on that. Yeah, some of the pilots you meet that are flying in LAG-3s, they know exactly what you're doing, and they take great pride in being able to shoot down G2s and Focke-Wulf 190A3s, and I think that is something that really shows also that balance can be achieved in a game, even though arguably one side is stronger. And I also like that some of the aircraft are able to do some kind of alternate scenarios. Yeah, you're able to arm your LAG-3, for example, with a 23mm cannon or a 37mm cannon, which gives you way more tactical options. You can go attack ground targets with that. You can also attack bombers with that more potently than other machines of your nation and so on. So there are certain balances, and although each aircraft has a specific role to play, there is some leeway to allow you to experiment and at the same time also reward that experimentation that you have. And it's also nice to see that each nation and each plane really flies differently, and you can and will feel that when you fly on the multiplayer side. Now overall, during the development, there has been some issues regarding how certain planes have been modeled and their flight model. There is certainly some degree of discussion that can be done here. Yeah, why does this aircraft perform like this, or why can it only use its full engine power for so and so long, even though pilots have said they could have used it longer and so on. I think those discussions are very good to have. At the same time, the developers will at some point say this is how it's going to be. And at this point, we have to ask ourselves, does that decision by the developer detract from the overall game, yes or no? And in IL-2 Battle of Stalingrad, at the moment for me, it does not. Now, there are certain things that I don't like. For example, I think the Bf-109F4 going at full throttle, 1.4 ATA, the engine doesn't survive as long as I have heard from the accounts by pilots. Of course, the Focke-Wulf 190 cockpit is still a little bit of an issue there. You still see that slight bar. I think they have done a nice little compromise there. However, it's not as I would like to have it, but it is to the point where I would say, okay, it's a marked improvement over the first implementation, and I can accept it as I stand here right now. I can certainly see where the problems come in for the developers, yeah, and I believe that the developers have taken simply the decisions to look at the official manuals and say, right, what does it say in the official manual? Okay, the engine is only able to survive a certain amount of time via the official manual, and that's how it's going to be in the game. Now, the problem with that is that the manuals, for example, on the German side, were very much built with keeping in mind the longevity of the engine. Pilots that go above that time frame that is given in the manual certainly have come home with an intact aircraft, Of course, their engine has taken some strain, but they managed to do it. But that is because they didn't give a shit, let's say. Let's put it frank. They didn't give a shit about the manual because they were in a struggle for life and death. Now, in a game, again, I can see how they're using these official manuals and say, we're going to base our flight models on these. That will, of course, always be something that is criticized by various people that say, well, these aircraft were actually able to do more than you giving them credit for. Overall, however, I think that the advantage of the German planes is there if the pilot knows how to do it, but at the same time, the Soviet planes can, in fact, counter the German aircraft quite well. Pilot skill, of course, matters a lot, and I definitely also sometimes face off Russian pilots that work very nicely together and that do coordinate their attacks and also their defensive measures. So I'm really, really happy with how it is at the moment. Future-wise, I cannot speak for the future, but for now, the game is as it is and I like it. Now, one last thing I want to say is about the immersion. And I think that the IL-2 Battle of Stalingrad certainly is immersive. You feel like you're in a plane, you feel like you fly in a plane, and you feel like you fight in a plane. At the same time, however, there are certain little things that I want to see them improve, and I think something I have mentioned already in the past is that flak. I don't know if it's a problem with me. Apparently, some people don't have that same problem, but I don't hear flak. I see flak going off around me, and I don't hear it. And I've checked my sound options, I've checked my speakers, I've checked my headset, I don't hear it. And I should be able to hear it, but I've also talked with other pilots that don't hear it, and then there are pilots that do hear it. I don't know if this might be a personal issue, I just want to put it out there. The sound immersion is there. I think when you fly the plane, the engine sound, it changes, of course, as you put up the throttle and hold the throttle. The weapons, they make a satisfying sound, in my opinion, but when it comes to flak, I want to hear flak, guys. This is probably my little nitpick thing that isn't really important, that doesn't really detract from the overall experience. Probably one of those nitpick things that I would criticize if other people have it, but this is the one I have, and that is that I don't hear flak, and I want to hear flak, and I want to see these bursts right in front of my cockpit go off and just this big bang. I think that is something that can even be overcompensated in a game for. That might sound a little bit stupid, but I think that flak is one of those things that are really defining about aerial combat. Certainly we're not talking about a huge bomber formation here that gets under fire by 88 guns, but a little bit more panache, a little bit more behind those explosions would certainly be appreciated by me. But that's a little nitpick thing, and I don't even know why I talk about it this much, but I guess that's what something we all have. We all have that little thing that we just want to see in certain games, and this one is mine in IL-2 Battle of Stalingrad. Now, coming here to a conclusion, I've nearly talked 30 minutes here. Wow, that has been long again. I want to say once again that I think I gave you guys an overview of what I don't like with the game at the moment, and it does speak a little bit for how the game has been programmed over the last couple of months, and I hope that the developers will learn from that. Now, there are certainly things in those annoyances that will not be agreed upon by everybody. Certain people will like what I said, certain people will not like what I said. If you are somebody like that, please, write it down in the comments below, give your explanation for it. I'm more than happy to see different kind of opinions on this, whether it's on the progression system, whether it is on graphical options or on the controls. Tell me about your experiences with the game and so on. And if there's anything else that you don't agree with, just put it down below and tell me about it. As for those people that, once again, I want to put this in the conclusion, that ask me now, is it worth buying? Well, like I said in the beginning, I think you should deem this video not as a buying recommendation or do not buy warning, but more of one of the many things that you should consult before you buy this game. Now, it isn't cheap, but I think from the price tag, I did not have a problem with it so far. I think the money was well spent. It is roughly 100 euros for the deluxe pack, and the half of that for the normal pack, and I think the price is actually quite fair. The overall program is not as sim heavy as DCS, for example. It is certainly more on the lighter side. I think even if you compare it with IL-2 1946. We Germans, we always mess up our English numbers. We always say it a different way. 1946, there we go. I can definitely see how a lot of people will see this on the sim light side. The same thing goes with Cliffs of Dover. Yeah, when you go into Cliffs of Dover and you're on the Team Fusion mod and you go on the ATAG server and you start on your runway, you have to go through the motions of starting up your engines. You can't do that in IL-2 Battle of Stalingrad, where you press one button and it does it automatically. I think there should be an option here for players that say, no, I want to do it myself. Manual startup, please. And I think that is something certainly that can be implemented in the future. However, at the same time, it's not something that attracts the overall immersion, in my opinion. Certainly, it is something that people want to go through, and that can and should be implemented at some point. But as it is right now, it kind of serves this balance between sim and fun. And I know that a lot of simmers will probably argue that the fun comes out of the simming, and I certainly would agree to that as well. But simply to provide a game that is nicely balanced between the really complicated stuff, where you have to learn a certain, for example, engine turn-on checklist, or providing the player with simply a fast way to get into the action and then have the immersion come from there. I think IL-2 Battle of Stalingrad nails it quite nicely. I would like to see, for example, manual startup as well for those that like it. But I think the option to just have your engine start automatically should remain for those people that don't want to do it. I think that IL-2 Battle of Stalingrad has in fact managed to put itself quite nicely into the simulator genre as a quite immersive and, from the flying standpoint, also complicated game, but at the same time allow newer players but at the same time give a little bit of leeway to newer players and enable them to get into the game more easily and without so much of a fuss on the ground. Yeah. If a player, for example, I can definitely see how a player who is new to the whole thing and he's on the ground and he can't even get his engine to start, how he will lose interest by it. If you put him into the plane and you allow him to start the engine automatically and then take off and get into the action, I can definitely see how that player will then develop into somebody who also wants to go more immersive and wants to have manual engine management on the ground as well. So overall, it isn't as light as some people say it is. It's not War Thunder. Yeah, War Thunder is extremely simple for a simulator game. You plug in your joystick and you play. But it isn't as complicated as DCS, and I think, or even the old IL-2 Battle of. But at the same time, it's not as complicated as some of the other games that are out there, like IL-2 Cliffs of Dover. So in that way, I do think that there is a nice little balance here. But I just hope that maybe at some point there will be options for those players that want to have the more immersive checklist kind of stuff to come, and I will certainly also look forward to that. Now, rounding up here, guys, let me just say once again, if you have any kind of feedback, questions and so on, put them down below. And as always, I hope you guys have a great day, good hunting, and see you in the sky.